Hey, this is Dan Reynolds, and this is a demonstration of various reverbs that, with the objective of feeding a discussion on a Facebook group about staging a sound source, a musical sound source, in a sort of virtual space. This is something that we have to deal with a lot as composers who work with sample libraries, because we may be working with multiple libraries that have all been recorded in disparate locations and disparate spaces, and we have to somehow mix those together. And when we get those beautifully detailed recordings of instruments that have been recorded in, say, like a small ISO booth or some sort of in some sort of isolation in a very dry space, we somehow have to deal with that combined with our other sort of wet mixes or whatever have you. So this is hopefully I'm going to run through some of the plugins that I have. There are a couple that I don't have. Vienna's multi-impulse reverb Mur, that is as a reverb that's designed around convolution, that allows you to stage an instrument sound source, and Urcam's Spat, which I don't have, which is it's actually a surround. It's actually a surround reverb, so you can bring in like 8 channels of sound sources, and then you can move those channels around like a space, and it will try to simulate that. But lots of people hijack it for our purposes, which is to take a sound source and then simulate it inside of a space. So those two I do not have, so I can't talk about those. There may be some others that I'm not aware of. I'd love to hear about them. The ones that I am going to talk about today are Virtual Soundstage by Paralax-Audio, Silverspike R2, not to be confused with Exponential Audio's R2, Silverspike R2, Altiverb, Quantum Leap Spaces, and B2. So Virtual Soundstage, we'll just go straight to it. Oh, and then I have 2 sound sources that I'm going to be using for this demonstration. A djembe from Flying Hand Percussion, which I can play right here. And then I also have Sample Modeling's infamous trumpet, which is a really wonderful instrument, but it presents a challenge in this sort of objective because it's almost intensely dry. Sorry, I've got it through the. Let me. Yeah. So almost like the instrument in the absence of any spatial information. Now, just real quick, I want to bring up here. We have some videos that I created with a math tool that I use for class when I teach class, or talk about reverbs in class. So here we have a sound source and then a listener position with these really goofy ears that I drew. And this sound source is sending out a signal. And so we have this basic square space. Now, the aqua sort of wavefront, that is our direct signal. At least this particular one. You'll see that it alternates on each reflection, aqua and dark blue. So right here, we get the direct signal of our sound source hitting our ears. And there'll be some slight timing information, which is how we come up with all of our miking arrays to avoid phasing in these sorts of situations. But this timing information, let me just say that the human hearing is really bad, and we're really inaccurate. Most of our primary sense of sound source direction is based off of balance between the left and right ear sound. Like, if it's louder in the left ear than the right ear, then it's probably coming to our left. That's kind of like most of how we determine sound, where it's coming from. Technically, If you're really perceptible, you might be able to perceive the difference in timing across the left and right ear, and then you might also be able to recognize some sort of diffusion if there's like your head is in the way of the sound source. But on the whole, here's this direct signal coming in, and we may perceive it louder in the left than on the right because of slight dissipation and this slight timing information possibly. And then you have the first reflection. So we have a reflection coming off of this left wall, the back wall, and we're waiting for this first signal to hit the right and rear walls or the front walls here. So waiting for that reflection. Okay, so now the left wall reflection is hitting us. So we're hearing a repeat of this same sound, only altered by the absorptive material of the wall. So if the surface is is absorbing certain frequencies, then it's going to start to color the sound. And then we have our front wall first reflection, and now our back wall first reflection, and then finally our right wall first reflection hits us. And so that delay, all those delays in hearing that sound, that's our early reflections. That's what we mean by early reflections. And anything after that, all this diffusion, that's basically our late reflections. And it's sort of a gradual process. You have early reflections that come in, and then they start to get less and less distinct because they bounce around the room and are absorbed or reflected or colored in some way. And then this is obviously just a basic square two-dimensional space. We'd also be getting reflections off the floor and the ceiling and any sort of objects that might be in the room or other players, people. Again, sound can reflect off of them and be absorbed by them. So, all those things change the sound of our space and how we receive those early reflections. But generally speaking, that's what we talk about with those early reflections. It's the first hits of the sound source off of some non-direct signal, some indirect reflection. So, all right, going back to virtual soundstage. With that in mind, let me plug this in. All right, so we'll load up VSS. And I'll start with my drum, and we'll take a look at the virtual soundstage sort of interface and the way that this works. So first you have an input offset section, which allows you to manipulate the stereo information of your sound source coming into virtual soundstage. And it allows you to do a couple things. It allows you in one module to start adjusting the gain and delay of the left and right signals in an attempt to try to center your sound source. If, say, for example, your sound source was recorded in a position like seated, say, to the right or left, and you had stereo information like that, and you were bringing it into virtual soundstage to reposition it, this is an attempt to do that. Although I will say that if you have a sound source that was recorded in position, it's not really appropriate for this product. I really don't think so. I mean, I know that the developer would disagree with me, but I think that once you have a recording in position, there's so much spatial information that's encapsulated in those samples and those sounds that you're really starting to fuck with the sense of space. I think this is a more appropriate tool for close mic'd or really dry mic'd sounds, stuff with very minimal spatial information. But the mono maker can be quite useful because I find that if your sound source is stereo, let's say you had a close stereo mic for some reason, and you're trying to spatialize that, there's always the potential for phasing, irregularities, or other stuff that you would want to avoid by simply making it mono. And then also, sometimes, depending on how they handle this particular tool, handles left and right stereo information on input, that could change what you want to do here as well. So that's the input offset section. After that, we have a nice sort of illustrated stage, and I can manipulate this speaker and move it around the stage. This is assuming this is where I want to place my sound source, and then there's like this really tiny drawing of like a deca tree here, like a really simple tree, a left and right and mid mic, which you can then control the mix between down here in this section. Now, it also has an option to to simulate air absorption, which is the certain. You may notice that over distance that certain frequencies carry better than other frequencies, or have more power, and so sometimes over distances you lose some detail to your sound source, and that's an attempt to sort of do this. It's kind of like a filter, but it modulates based off of the distance here. And then we have independent control over the direct signal and the early reflections. So without further ado, we've got input, my sound source, my drum. Okay, so we got my drum. And now I can sort of grab this speaker and move the drum to different... Oops, I forgot to put loop on. Oh, no, I didn't forget to put loop on. Hold on a second. Let's loop that drum. Now, it's still quite a dry sound that we're hearing, It's basically just the direct panning information, the simulation of air absorption, which we can turn on and off, and, the direct signal and the early reflection information. So this is all simulated timings. And then you'll hear like a bit of a presence simulation on your sound source. Okay, so that's the drum sound source. And the drum is a really forgiving one because it sounds really good dry. Here we've got the trumpet. So this is the dry trumpet. And then through the system. This would be where the trumpets would sit. Right around this section, according to his diagram. But I find that if you use this tool, you're better off just going with your gut. What sounds good. And then you may want to, manipulate the balance between direct signal and early reflections. But really keep in mind that all this tool does is add early reflections and simulate that panning and distance, which is no small task, but it's not the full job. It's not like a finished mix here. Okay, so that's virtual soundstage. Let's move over to Silverspike, and this is why I actually had them. I had to pre-mono it. So Silverspike, like virtual soundstage, allows you to control the position of a sound source in a room. It actually allows you to control the left and right channels independently, which I find can be really dangerous because if you can see over here on the output section, you can control the dry signal, so it can do parallel if you wish. And then the direct signal includes time delay over distance, right? So that means that if the right and left channel are different distances, then you have different timings on those signals, and you can, introduce pretty ugly phasing if you don't do it correctly. So if you've got a stereo sound source, then it can get really tweaky. You have to really manipulate it to find the right phase relationship. So it's not as forgiving as a virtual soundstage. So I tend to just monofy my inputs And then you have control over the balance of the early and late reflections, respectively. You can change the size of the room, the size of the reverb, the sort of air slash presence in the sound. And then you can also control the absorptive properties of the surfaces, or simulate that with a dampening curve on your ERs and reverbs separately. And then you control stuff like the panning of the room and reverb, and then also the stereo width of those sounds. So this one's kind of a dual thing. You know, we've got the early reflections being simulated with mathematics, and then the reverb is basically an algorithmic reverb. So I'm going to monofy my instruments. I'm just going to go to the right channel. Aton's going to hate me for doing this, but this is really how I need to use this. And then the brass instrument, go full right. So there we are. Okay, now my drums. Oh, what? I forgot to send you guys gotta tell me about this. Turn it on the Silverspike. Okay. All right, so you can move the left and right channel independently, right? So I'm setting it just to the right information. And then you can also move the mic position if you want. Which is actually pretty powerful. You know, you can set up quite an array of parameters to control. And then you can, you know, create a small space or change the size of the space. The prominence of the direct signal versus the early reflections. Just do the late reflections. No. Or you could go parallel and also do the dry. But that's not really the point of this. So, this one's pretty good. And I'm sad because the developer no longer works on it. He still sells it, but he doesn't develop it anymore. I mean, it's 32-bit, you know, VST. I don't even know what Mac options are available. All right, so that Silverspike gives you an idea of what it does. Again, I find that its sort of reverb section is pretty artificial sounding. It doesn't have a smoothness to it that I prefer in my reverb. So I don't think that it's good for that. I find that it's pretty good for setting up the direction, setting up the basic panning, distance, kind of like what VSS does, and then everything else needs to be handled by something else. Okay, finally, we're getting to Altiverb. Now, Altiverb, you got to keep in mind that Altiverb's value is not in this particular feature. This is really like an additional feature to accompany a really large product, and it's the most expensive product on this entire lineup here. For a reason. I mean, it's got a massive library of impulses, and it has a just so many ways you can manipulate and control the sound that I'm not going to mess around with that stuff. I'm going to go straight to the stage positioning because that's really what we're talking about here. And I'm going to talk really briefly about that. Let me just make sure I center my sound sources. Bam. Okay. All right, so I've loaded up probably the most popular impulse on here. I think it's one of the top 5 at least. The Todd AO impulse. And then I've set up the stage position here. Now, the way that Altiverb's set up is we have impulses that have been recorded at different distances and widths. Basically, if you can imagine here, let's see, we've got the diagram. It's kind of hard to see, but here we have the speaker representing the sound source, and then the sort of black icons, those are our microphones. And so this diagram is sort of illustrating the position of the listener position and the sound source position. And so what you find using this product is that you will probably be selecting different impulses based on the depth information, like how far away is your sound source from your microphones, and then from there you'll use maybe the stage position to pan them around. Now, let's grab my. Okay, so let me start really close here. We'll start this 3.5 meter narrow mics, and I've got the. Alright, so let's grab the mid mic here. So this is the 8 meter. And then the 11 meter, or almost 12. And then if we went with the wide mics here, and then like very exaggerated distances. All right, and then they have stereo to stereo if we got a stereo sound source. And this one, in this case, we want a mono sound source. So that gives you an idea of how the Altiverb stage position works. Let's throw on the brass. Let's get close here. Okay, so it's important to keep in mind here that this is not simulating timing information. This is basically parameterizing the impulse, parts of the impulse structure. Now, they haven't gone into any detail that I've seen where I can understand exactly how they're approaching this, especially with this sort of sound source. Where all their mics were not recorded in multiple positions. I think what they did is, if I remember correctly, and forgive me, audio ease, if I get this wrong, but they created an algorithm for simulating this panning based off of one sample session of, I think Mozartgebouw or the Concertgebouw, like some sort of German concert stage, and from that information, they sort of understood or generated an algorithm that simulated this with whatever information they got coming in. So I believe that's how they approach this. I don't understand the process exactly, so I can't speak to that, but there you go. So I think that shows what Altiverb can do, though. And like I said, there's a ridiculous collection. It's especially, oh man, if you're working in post-production and you need to place sounds in weird places, it's a beautiful collection. Musically, I find that sometimes I get frustrated with the differences in how these were all recorded and some of the color that I get. But that's really nitpicky. All right, so moving on to let's I did center those. Let's move over to spaces, and let's understand what spaces is and where I feel like its value is. So spaces, like Altiverb, is convolution-based reverb. All right, so this is sampled impulses of rooms. I'm not going to go into how that's done, but unlike Altiverb, you have very limited control over the reverb impulse itself. Where Altiverb is almost like an impulse workshop, and in the XL version of Altiverb, you can actually create your own impulses, which is why its library is so large and extensive. Spaces is actually quite limited in how you can control the signal. With that said, I feel like the impulses were beautifully engineered, and you find a lot of consistency in that throughout their collection. Now, I've loaded up a little scoring stage here, and I'm going partial dry, partial wet. And you don't have a lot of control. You can control the dry signal, you can control the wet signal, you can control pre-delay on the impulse, you can control the levels of the input, you can control the mono on the output, and you can control the filters. Like, you can basically have a high pass and low pass. And then you have a collection of preset impulses. Okay, so spaces. Now, the djembe sounds good dry. It's really something that fits well dry, and it responds nicely to this sort of parallel processing. If we were to take away the dry signal, you get just the wet signal. You can hear. What I like about this is that you can really hear a lot of there's a lot of transparency in the frequencies. You can really get a sense of the instrument is being well represented. But ultimately, it's like a really simple reverb. Now, the collection's nice, but there's no way you can control staging. I mean, I could pan it, but it's not the same. And when we go to something that's really so intensely dry, like this trumpet, it's hard to find something that's, I don't know, that I would personally like. So that's what Spaces is bringing to the table when it comes to a discussion like this. Okay, finally, real quick, B2. Now, B2 is algorithmic, and you can have there are a lot of parameters that you can control here. And it has a serial process. If you wish, you can have two reverbs. You can also cross-modulate the reverbs and do interesting things. And I think that B2's real power is actually in the creative reverbs that you can design. I find that, like, from a sort of more abstract standpoint, I can make really interesting reverbs with B2. Like, something that takes a sound source, like a drum, and then turns it into, like, a pad sound, that sort of stuff. I find that B2 lends itself beautifully to. As far as this goes, let's load up. So here I have a patch, a reverb patch that I designed, which I designed around a scoring stage sample that I had. So I was comparing basically a really dry sample and a wet sample from another library, and trying to get close. And I'm never really happy with it. And I've spent lots of time doing this sort of stuff and designing stuff and trying to figure out what I like and what I don't like. And it can get really subjective, and sometimes you just sort of go nuts and stay up all night and then hate everything you did next morning. But so here, let me throw the drums through here, and I'll just sort of bring up the wet mix on this guy. And so you can hear now it's like completely wet. This isn't simulating a room. I mean, you know, it's not a room simulation. This is just me designing a patch that sounds sort of room-like. And then our trumpet. So, not really like staging again. We're not controlling left and right timings of early reflections. So, it's not really serving that purpose. It's a nice reverb. Like Spaces is a nice reverb. But it's not. I don't feel like it's good for that. Now, sometimes what I will do is say, take let's monofy this, and I might run this through one of VSS or Silverspike to place, and then I might send to that's B2. So I might do something like here where I've got Silverspike loaded, and then like that, and then I might go something like, let's go full wet here, and then I might control, the send value. Which is kind of like best of both worlds, right? I've done even crazy things like through Silverspike, through B2, and then finishing off with Spaces and trying to create something there, and it gets crazy, but this is sort of the job, right? So anyway, I hope that was helpful, informative. And wish you luck in your search and endeavors, as I have spent so much time messing around with this stuff. All right. Cheers.